My name's Sophie Lane. I'm the Chief Relationships Officer for the ATI, and we're bringing you this panel session in conjunction with the AGP. Hopefully most of you were just at the AGP strategy launch, but if you weren't, I'd encourage you to download it and have a little read of that. So what we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be talking about the flight path to net zero. We've done this in such a way that we have a number of panellists. We're going to introduce them. They're going to talk a little bit about what they're doing and their perspective. And then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, some of which you've already pre-submitted, some of which hopefully you will be thinking of as we go through the day. If you want to ask a question in person, that's really encouraged. If you'd like to use Slido, we are using it. And if you want to download it, and I'll mention this number many times, this meeting is #3234628. So if you want to do Slido, that's how you do it. And that's just a way to ask questions without me knowing which one of you it was. So I'm going to facilitate this panel. And as you'll see, we've got a really good group of experts here. I'm going to make an apology for Ron Van Manen, who had train trouble. He was coming from Brussels, so it was Eurostar and Heat, apparently, so he's not been able to make it this morning. But apart from that, we've got a really good quality panel for you to hear from and hopefully to interact with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce them one by one in a creeping wall of death down towards the end. You'll hear from them, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I'd just like to start by introducing Paul Clarke. Paul is the head of Aerospace for the National Composites Centre. Can't say that very well, but thank you very much for being with us, Paul, and would you like to open?
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Is it on?
Yep.
So, so obviously as part of net zero and the challenges that we have within the aerospace sector, composites play a massive role in the challenges to improve products through lightweighting and the performance characteristics you can get from improved efficiency, improved aerodynamics, improved performance overall in terms of the use of composites. And we're very much integrated into some of the major programs in developing that across not only the NCC but across the whole HVMC network as well, working with our colleagues in AMRC, MTC, and the AFRC in Scotland. We have some clear strategic priorities. Wing of Tomorrow, driving down manufacturing cost, improving manufacturing efficiency mostly, in terms of improving the speed, the rate, the capabilities that we need to be able to achieve the challenges for future aircraft. But also, when we're using those materials, starting to understand the impact that they have and the processes that we use and how we can improve our efficiency in the development of and use of those materials. And that includes starting to look at sustainable materials, recyclability of materials, and the challenges around how we can reduce the amount of rework, the amount of quality that we can bring into the process, where we can then bring in new ways of manufacturing products to reduce the energy consumption. A lot of that relates to the amount of embodied carbon that we develop in those products, and we're working through with the Sustainable Composites work program between us and the CPI, one of our HVMC network partners, to look at the best way where we can potentially recycle those materials and evaluate the entire life cycle of those products, from the design element all the way through to the recyclability and then end of life of those materials. As we move forward in terms of net zero, we are very heavily involved and played an active part in the ATI program around the development of cryogenic hydrogen tanks and cryogenic storage of liquid hydrogen. And we're actively working with a number of different companies to try and push the barriers, understand the material characteristics, and understand how we can really improve emissions of aircraft going forward as well.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Paul. And sitting next to Paul, we have Alan Newby. Alan works for Rolls-Royce, and he is the Director of Aerospace Technology and Future Programmes. I clearly haven't learned all these very long titles, but thank you for joining us, Alan. And I know you've had some exciting announcements this week, and perhaps you'd just like to give your kind of opening remarks.
Thank you. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I think the best way to set the scene from an opening perspective is really to talk through our sustainability strategy, which has three major pillars. The first of which is to continue to improve the efficiency of the gas turbine, and I think we see that as highly important. If you look forward, then clearly in the near term, the likely alternate fuel is going to be SAF, and beyond that, potentially hydrogen. But under both those scenarios, we still see the need for a highly efficient gas turbine. It's likely the fuels are going to be both more expensive and likely in short supply. So the premium, in fact, will increase efficiency. So from that perspective, we continue to push forward the efficiency of the gas turbine. We now have the Ultrafan, which is our next generation engine, just about, well, it is built, it's just about to go on test. It now looks like an engine, and it's big. 140 inches diameter, lots of new technology in there. It's not just an advanced geared architecture. It's packed full of high technology, including composite materials on the fan blades, high temperature materials in the turbine, and so forth. And that, you know, the later part of this year is going to be really exciting when we start to run the engine. Second part of the strategy is on SAF, and we've been really demonstrating that we can run all our engines on SAF, and we've made a commitment to make sure that all our engines will be SAF capable by the end of next year. In fact, we're ahead of that program and are already doing various demonstration flights on that. But not only the technical side, we're working with governments, working with Jet Zero Council, and working with the oil and gas companies to make sure that we work on the supply and demand side as well as just proving the technical capability. And then the final pillar of our strategy is to look at the kind of next generation technologies, which the two major ones for us are electrification. We've got a couple of major programs on electrification, which are just looking at effectively advanced mobility methods as well as new zero carbon transport systems. So that we're working closely with Vertical Aerospace on their urban air mobility vehicle, and we announced some time ago a partnership with Tecnam on the P-Volt to look at commuter aircraft, zero carbon, all battery, all electric commuter aircraft. So again, so we're advancing the technologies on those, as well as some work which some of you may have seen where we ran a 2100, AE2100 with a gas turbine fixed to a 2.5 megawatt generator last year and demonstrate a full hybrid electric system. But the news that Sophie was referring to at the beginning is yesterday we announced our hydrogen program. We've been working effectively under the radar for quite a while on hydrogen now. We've now got to the position where we think it's time to tell the world what we're doing. We've got a good program ahead of us. We announced that we'll be ground testing our first vehicle this year and another one on a full liquid system later on. So that's a really big announcement for us and getting ourselves ready for future hydrogen propulsion. And then as part of that, a further announcement today, we announced that we will be partnering with EasyJet on that program, where they will work with us looking at some of the applications for hydrogen and particularly some of the operational and infrastructure implications of working with hydrogen as well. So an exciting show for us. We've announced we're just about to run the Ultrafan, and we've also given a really good overview of what we're going to do from a hydrogen perspective.
Thanks, Alan. And the Ultrafan, if you haven't been to see it, is really impressive. It's huge. We've got a bit of it on the ATI stand. There's a bit of it on the Rolls-Royce stand. So that's a bit of a plug. Come and visit us both. So let me introduce Claire Smith. Claire's the VP of Fuel Management at Airbus. And we're delighted to have you. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. And I'm delighted to be here as well. And it seems a day of announcements and sustainability very much at the front and centre of the agenda. But I guess before I go into what we're doing at Airbus, I'll give the context of what my role is. My role contributes to the here and now in terms of the R&T, the development, certification, the in-service support of all 7,000 flying Airbus commercial aircraft. So that's the fuel and inerting system for every platform, which is fantastic. And I guess, you know, I've been at Airbus 25 years, and I've had many, many proud moments over those 25 years, of which this year seems to be a really exciting, pivotal journey. I guess in the day job, XLR took its first flight a couple of weeks ago with a 30% increased fuel burn, so complementing Alan's comments around, you know, improved efficiency of our aircraft is step one, and air traffic management of those aircraft and renewing our fleet is a huge contributing factor. So 30% reduction in fuel burn, and obviously quite a different fuel system on that platform. I'm pleased to say that we're also responsible in my team for generating the specification for 100% sustainable aviation fuel. So we're working with ASTM and obviously as a global standard working with Boeing to define that specification. But we are testing 100% sustainable aviation fuel on many of our aircraft platforms today. So the single aisle family on CFM and Pratt & Whitney engines, the A380, the A350, and in September the Voyager, so the A330. I guess the important thing in terms of working with DLR and working with Rolls-Royce and working with the consumers, we are using chase planes to actually really monitor those contrails. And we are seeing an 80% CO2 benefit, that's a fact. But obviously the journey is a long one because we need to obviously analyse those contrails at different altitudes, at different temperatures, at different humidities. So you can imagine the complexity of pulling all of that data together. So in terms of certifying all of our platforms, we have a route between 2025 and 2028 to certify all of our aircraft fuel and inerting systems for 100% sustainable aviation fuel. People always ask me, why does it take so long? My own boss asked me, why does it take so long? But you can imagine the amount of engine and APU combinations that I have on all of the platforms. You can imagine the different equipment in all of the fuel systems, and actually how we use the fuel system on every platform is different from each other. So, but we have a roadmap. We're working on that. We have a certification plan for every platform, and I'm really proud because it's a big part of our future. People that will take an XLR into service in 2024 will be fueling that on 100% SAF in 25 years. Let's face it, they won't be putting hydrogen into it. So we'll be putting SAF onto our 7,000 plus aircraft that are in service. So it takes a huge part of the journey. Next part of my job is obviously working, 45% of my team are actually working on hydrogen technologies. So we obviously support the ZeroE program. We're at early technology readiness levels, but we have a review for a flying demonstrator, so a gas turbine on the A380 platform to fly in 2026, and we're developing the technology roadmap to enter a service of a zero-emission aircraft on hydrogen in 2035. So it's really exciting, and I guess it's really, I consider myself to have one of the dream jobs in the UK today, to be sort of fronting this up, and the acceleration that we've had in the last 2.5 years that I've been in role, and I guess collectively we're just not going backwards now, are we? The announcements that we've had today just show that this traction is a great one. When I joined Airbus, sustainability was switch that you monitor off when you go home, switch the light off, don't run the tap for too long. Now we're talking serious impact to the environment and the societal expectation that goes with that. And I guess I always say I look at this through the eyes of my 15-year-old. Not doing this is not an option. So I look forward and scared to some of your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Claire. Sitting next to Claire is Rachel Gardner-Poole. Rachel is the Chief Operating Officer at the Connected Places Catapult, but for the purposes of this panel, she's the recently appointed chair of the Zero Emission Flight Delivery Group on the Jet Zero Council, and is therefore currently missing her own announcement. But we are very, very grateful to have you here, Rachel.
Thank you very much. So before I talk about the Jet Zero Council, the role that I've got there, I just want to say, I think we are, as you alluded to, and Claire, we are kind of on this pivotal point of change. Just looking, just the announcements in the last 24 hours is incredible as we're moving forward. And I've always thought that kind of to instigate change, I think you need three things. You need innovation, you need collaboration, and diversity as well. So with those three things in my head, when I was asked, I do feel incredibly privileged to be asked to be the chair of the Zero Emission Flight Delivery Group as part of the Jet Zero Council. Those three things were really in my mind as I set it up. Just for those who don't know, the Jet Zero Council is a partnership between government and aerospace and aviation industries to really look at how we achieve kind of Jet Zero strategy, how we achieve net zero by 2050. So that's the overall aims of the group. And then the Zero Emission Flight Delivery Group is set up to actually deliver on that ambition. So I've set that up, deliberately did kind of try and choose a selection of people who would really represent across industry. Some of them are sitting here on the stage with me, but real kind of diversity of thought was important to me, diversity of experience, those who've got innovation backgrounds as well, so that we can really feel confident in what we're going to deliver in the future. So we had the first meeting on Friday just gone. I think people will agree it was engaging, energising. We discussed and debated the terms of reference for much longer than I expected, but that is important because it's important we know what we're focused on, and we all were absolutely agreed and aligned in the need to produce a realistic delivery plan, roadmap, more than a roadmap, a kind of detailed plan that shows us how we get there, recognising that there's a lot of work that's already gone on to date, and we don't start from afresh, but we actually bring all that together as well. So the Zero Emission Flight Delivery Group, we're going to have 3 subgroups. We've got the aircraft subgroup, and that's chaired by Gary Elliott, CEO of ATI. We've got the regulation subgroup, which is chaired by Tim Johnson at the Civil Aviation Authority. And then the third subgroup is the infrastructure subgroup, which is chaired by Dave Lees, the CEO of Bristol Airport. So that's the structure. We're looking at setting up those subgroups later this year after the summer recess to get those working, and longer term we'll also be looking at commercialisation of all this as well. So that's our plans. If anyone does want to hear more or you want to be signed up, you can become an affiliate member, it's called, where you can essentially be on the distribution list for sharing of information, and also if we send out surveys as well to yourselves, you'll be able to contribute in that way.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And you'll have noticed, hopefully, that this panel has been carefully composed of different bits of the ecosystem. So you've got a couple of your big OEMs, we've got the catapults, we've got the policy kind of environment, and key to that as well is academia. And so I'm delighted to introduce Iain Gray, who's the Director of Aerospace for Cranfield University.
Well, thank you, Sophie. So I am here representing the voice of academia. I will talk a bit about Cranfield, but it's picking up on what a number of people have said, picking up on the collaboration aspect. So I'm going to talk much broader than just Cranfield. I'm thinking 4 years ago at Farnborough, and I remember the then CEO of Airbus standing up and giving a speech saying, we're on the cusp of a new technology revolution, the third revolution in aerospace: autonomy, applied artificial intelligence, new materials, new propulsion methodologies. We're going to see new configurations. I mean, it was a really, really exciting vision. One of the other announcements at Farnborough 4 years ago was the launch of what we called the UK Aerospace Research Consortium. And we believed that a lot of those revolutionary technologies that the CEO had described are actually being developed and happening within our university network. But the problem was, in the UK, there are some 130 universities all working on aerospace. There are probably somewhere between 12 and 15 leading aerospace universities, all playing into that big agenda. And the launch of a UK Aerospace Research Consortium was, how do we kind of maximise the benefits to UK PLC of all of those combined facilities, academic prowess, and for students that are coming out as well. I mean, it's an enormous capability for the UK. So UK Aerospace Research Consortium was launched to do that. Just a few examples of where the strengths within our UK, we call it UK ARC, do visit it in Hall 4. Strengths, I will talk about Cranfield. When I joined Cranfield, my vision was very much one of establishing, defining and delivering the 4 A's: aerospace of the future, aircraft, airport of the future, airspace management of the future, and airline of the future. And I thought at the time everybody said, hey, what are you doing? But now the agenda and collaboration shows that was exactly the right thing to do. And with Cranfield's Global Research Airport, we're ideally positioned to assess and handle some of the integration aspects. We're working with people on the hydrogen agenda, the air traffic control of the future agenda, how that plays into it. Some real strengths from Cranfield. If I look at Cambridge part of UK ARC, yesterday they announced they launched a project with Boeing, which was a simulator for assessing the whole environmental side of things. Real strength in the Whittle Lab at Cambridge. I look at Nottingham University, world-class power electronics laboratories. absolutely incredible. I look at Bristol University and the stuff they're doing with National Composites Centre and Composites. So there's enormous capability around our UK university network. And what we're trying to do with UK ARC is to harness all of that capability and provide a front door in for industry, for government, for people that are visiting the UK to come and find out what that capability is. And today, for those that were here on the AGP strategy launch, you'd have seen talk of what was called the Strategic Aerospace Research Forum, SARF. And that is, so how do we now start joining the dots up between some of these various ingredients? So how does the university academic network link in with the NGOs, with High Value Manufacturing Catapult? What is the business engagement model? And so for me, the development 4 years on from when we announced UK ARC, some real tangible academic success stories, a business engagement model that's now being put in place and recognized in the AGP national strategy. So academia has a huge role to play in moving forward. Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you. So the way this is going to run... Matt. No, that's all right. Come in. Let's put you on the spot straight away then.
No, please do. It's the least I deserve. What would you like me to answer?
Well, no. So this is Matt Gorman, the Director of Sustainability at Heathrow Airport. And all we're doing at the moment is some opening remarks, just setting the context of you and why you're here. And then we will move into questions from the audience regarding the flight path to net zero.
Brilliant, thank you. And many apologies. I had committed to speak something, not realising it was the other side of Farnborough, and finished exactly when this session started. So I'm Matt Gorman, Carbon Strategy Director at Heathrow. Why am I here? That's a good question to start with. I'm here because I've been passionate about environment for as long as I can remember. I was going through the loft recently and found the badge when I joined Greenpeace for my sins at the age of 12. So that's kind of driven my my career since then. But I've also been passionate that whole time about air travel. I was 8 when my family went to live in Hong Kong, and I still remember that feeling of getting on a long-haul flight and arriving in a completely new climate and culture and surrounded by new things, and that kind of buzz has stayed with me. So I guess, why am I here? Well, my job's about how do we do both of those things. I mean, as people have said, a real sense of momentum in the sector at the moment with the whole range of announcements recently, but really over the last few years, the whole sector committing to net zero. I mean, just the juxtaposition today, I was just looking at the BBC News, the latest update on the live feed was that UK's top temperature reached at Heathrow 40.2 degrees, the highest ever recorded. So that sense of urgency is hugely pressing for us all as well. Some of us were at the launch of the initial sharing of some of the government's Jet Zero strategy earlier today. The UK has set a lead in as a country committing to net zero, the aviation sector doing the same, the government doing the same. What does that all mean for my organisation at Heathrow? Our carbon footprint, including flights, is about 20 million tonnes a year. That's a big carbon footprint for a company. That's because we follow the international guidance to include flights all the way to their destination. 95% of that footprint is from planes, 5% is everything on the ground. Only 0.1% of that footprint is directly controlled by Heathrow. So our job is fundamentally an influencing and an advocacy one. And if I give just a quick thumbnail of the journey to net zero, picking up on what people have said, efficiency, SAF, hydrogen and removals. Efficiency, a fundamental foundation. We need to operate more efficiently in the air, on the ground, continue rolling out more efficient aircraft, but that won't get us to net zero alone. If we roll out all of that with some of the growth that's forecast for aviation, you'd keep emissions around where they are today, which isn't enough. SAF we see as critical because, particularly for Heathrow, but actually for the global aviation sector, because it's the one thing we can see by 2050, and we have to have a laser focus on where we can get to by 2050, that can solve the 70%-ish of emissions that come from mid and long haul journeys. Hydrogen, and it's an and, by the way, hydrogen a critical role in zero emission flight in Rachel's group, particularly for shorter journeys, and anything that we can't solve by 2050 and before, we're going to have to suck out of the atmosphere. That's the basic package. How are we influencing and advocating at Heathrow, particularly at the moment on SAF? Well, we introduced a landing charge to close about half of the price gap between fossil kerosene and SAF from last year. Oversubscribed by airlines, which is brilliant. We wanted 0.5% of all fuel at Heathrow this year to be SAF. We think we'll get a bit more than that, which is great. That's about 20% of all of the SAF being produced globally this year, which tells you two things. There's not a lot of SAF, but it also tells you that if you send the right market signals, you can start to encourage development. What we then need, and this is where the advocacy to government comes in, we have to have the right mandates and the right price incentives that will really send a market signal. Proud as I am of our landing charge incentive at Heathrow, and we will scale it up next year. That alone is not going to scale a global SAF industry.
Thank you. And I think you're making a really good point there. There is such a complex ecosystem here, and there is a very much a who moves first kind of feeling about it. And actually the point of conversations like this is really to open up that kind of conversation and try and break down some of the barriers to the actual movement forward that we all need. From a personal perspective, coming back from Spain last week, I was disgusted to know it was hotter in the UK. And, you know, that never used to happen when I was a kid. So you can see what's happening to the environment. So, right, let's move on to questions. As I say, we've got a few in the audience already, and then we'll kind of move forward from there. So, Alan, you've got a question. Do you want to? We've got a roving mic, actually.
Can you hear me? Okay.
All right.
My question is really, how much is the aerospace sector in control of its own destiny? To what extent do we rely on another upstream industries, such as the energy industry? And what can we do more to be more joined up and deliver?
Who wants to take that? I'm looking at you, Rachel, probably to start.
I was going to say, yeah. So, I mean, no, it was we had this very same conversation at our first SEF delivery group and about the linking in with the energy, because, you know, just look at hydrogen alone, you know, we do need hydrogen to be able to actually do this. We need enough of that. So, absolutely, there is a role, and, you know, whilst I don't work for the government, I do think, you know, the government recognise that they themselves need to ensure that we're joined up in that, so that, you know, when you're looking at supply and demand, just taking hydrogen as an example, it's not just aviation, it's the other industries that are looking at using that or already using this as one example. So absolutely, I think there is that. I also think it is absolute, the onus is on the aerospace and aviation industry as well, partly to identify and to look at that demand, which I know a lot of studies have already been done on that. So I'd say it's a combined effort.
Okay. And can I just ask, Claire and Alan, are you finding that you're having more conversations outside of the traditional aerospace industry as you're developing your programs that are looking at more sustainable technology?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, if you just look at SAF, for example, we've signed an MOU with Shell, we're in active conversations with BP, and 10% of the fuel we use on site will be SAF going forward. But I think the point of that is, it's a really good question. Some of the trades we do, so we could simply do the trades and look at my little control volume around the engine and work out which is the right one. And I'll give a plug for the ATI-sponsored Fly Zero, which did do a lot of the upstream work. You've got to go right back to say, right, what's best in terms of energy supply, energy availability, but also total impact on the environment. And I think we're getting better at those system studies now, because you can't just stop in your control volume. You've got to look at that one. And you ultimately come back, you know, the sort of limiting resource could be green energy in the future, whether you use that to make SAF, to produce hydrogen or whatever. That's going to be, and we've got to be able to illustrate which paths have which effect, be it on energy supply, on hydrogen requirements, you name it. And I think we're getting better at that. And interestingly enough, you know, Fly Zero did some good work on that. I'm sure individual companies have done their own work. I went to a presentation yesterday from Cambridge University, a thing called the Aviation Impact Accelerator, which some of you have seen, which is really, really good. It looks at the total life cycle impact of various energy sources, propulsion systems, and they're trying to get that public domain ultimately, and I think that's good. This shouldn't be some secret we keep within the industry. Let the public see what we're doing, hold us to account on that one, so you can see the choices we make. And I'm personally all for that. We've got to solve this quickly, and I'm happy to be held to account.
And just to complement, so I'll take that in two parts. One is the energy equation, which is a fascinating one, as to which energy should you use in which sector and when. Whilst we grow the supply of each energy source, it's, you know, the climatic science and the actual environmental impact and the understanding of that is absolutely key. So one of the influences that we all have along here is to work with data science and understanding that climatic model in the UK and beyond. So personally, really sort of proud to be helping drive that, because that's ultimately the goal. You know, yes, we're here as representing aerospace, but you know, we're part of, you know, a bigger picture, and understanding our contribution and getting the minimised correct contribution from our industry is absolutely key. And in terms of working with other industries, clearly on hydrogen, we're working very closely with the space industry. You know, it's not without its challenges in terms of aerospace application, of course, but we can't ignore their vast experience in hydrogen and cryogenics. So clearly, we're working really closely with the space industry on ZEROe.
Perfect. Iain, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a few comments. I mean, I think the last 2.5 years have been incredibly difficult for everybody. But pre-COVID, the aerospace manufacturing industry had seen unprecedented, you know, year after year growth. It didn't really have to think too much about some of the interactions. I think COVID taught everybody the lesson. If nobody's flying, there's no need for aeroplanes. If there's no need for aeroplanes, there's no manufacturing sector. So one of the key things that has really been implanted on people's minds, I think, through COVID is even within the aviation aerospace sector, there are dependencies and we all need to work. I cannot imagine, from my previous aerospace background, an AGP strategy launch happening where Robert Courts, as the Minister for Aviation, was actually stood up and giving remarks. And I think that's a huge testimony to the fact that government, as well as the aviation industry, has recognised the need to work together. So a slightly different angle to the just, is it in control of its own destiny? Even within the aviation community, the aerospace industry cannot be in complete control of its own destiny. We've got to collaborate.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Okay, Hitendra, I see you. You had a question for the panel.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for the messages around collaboration. You know, given the various strategies we've got with the ATI, the AGP, etc., and the complex landscape around the levelling up agenda and so forth, you know, what does the panel think we need to do in terms of collaboration to make sure that we make best use of all the resources that are out there? Because, like we've said so far, you know, we've got it all in the UK. You know, what kind of mechanisms can we put in place to make it all work together for the benefit of the sector?
I'm happy to just have an initial go at that. I should have said as well as a Heathrow job, I also chair our industry coalition called Sustainable Aviation for the next couple of years. So that's airlines, manufacturers, airports, NATS in the UK, and was a world first when it launched 15 or so years ago in bringing those groups together around a common plan. So a point on collaboration and then a point on the role of government. I think collaboration is key. But it needs to be around a really focused and clear plan with milestones and deliverables. So we published we were the first national aviation sector, actually as the UK, to commit to net zero. We did that just before the pandemic. Something that I think collectively, for those in the UK industry, we can be hugely proud of. Within 18 months, actually, the whole global sector had made that same commitment. That's brilliant, but you need a firm plan to deliver. So what we've introduced since then is 2030 targets, and we're developing the set of deliverables that will move us towards that. So collaboration, yes, but around a plan. The other point I'd make is we can't let the government off its role when we talk about collaboration. So obviously we want to work in partnership. Many of us sit around the Jet Zero Council, but there are some things that only governments can do. Only governments can mandate a certain percentage of SAF by 2030. Great to see the UK is talking about 10% by that time. Only governments, through their ability to tax and spend, can create the right price incentives for SAF. I gave the example of Heathrow. Brilliant, we've got a landing charge incentive. We want to increase that next year, and that will help send a market signal. But if we're honest, it's a small market signal compared to what we need from government. So collaborate, yes, but advocate the right government action too.
Paul, do you want to come in?
So I think I completely agree from a government agenda perspective that needs to be front and centre. But I also think that one of the big challenges around collaboration is around the ecosystem and making sure we have one coherent message. One of the outputs of the recent Catapult study has prompted a change within the HVMC, looking at the one step closer together. So this is a way of bringing together the catapults, and not only the catapults, but the ecosystem that sit around the catapults as well, and how we work more strategically and we collaborate closer together. So I chair the aerospace community of practice that bring together all of the aerospace challenges and look at them as a collective view from a HVMC perspective to drive a common purpose and linking with the right initiatives to have that clear understanding, working closely with the UK Strategic Aerospace Research Forum to make sure we have that pull from academia or the push from academia to say this is the great technology that's coming through and this is how HVMC can help to support that through organisations and industry to really understand the challenges and really articulate the possibilities of how we move forward. One other thing I would say is there's a big piece for us around education and how we bring training in, because a lot of the new technologies that we're talking about, a lot of the step forward that we need to take is about educating not only those coming through into the industry and how we can make aerospace exciting for everybody, looking at the possibilities of moving to a net zero activity, but also for those working within the industry as we change the skill sets that we need to be able to harness and develop these technologies going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And actually, you know, we talked in the earlier session about skills, and I know there's going to be a group talking about skills on Thursday. But as you're bringing people into the industry, it's not only about education there, but it's education into the public and into that public debate as well, I think.
100%, yeah. We're actually building a HVMC learning and training development program to try and help to showcase some of the other possible as well. So it's linking that in.
I think we're fortunate in we live in a sector where levelling up is actually something which is very much part of our psyche. It was a really good story from Oriel Petrie in the last session where she talked about introducing an apprentice to the Prime Minister yesterday on the stand, and she said this apprentice, in an almost unprompted way, said to the Prime Minister, you know, about the importance of levelling up, and you know, so people do understand the importance in our sector of levelling up, and whether it be the manufacturing facilities and the catapults, which are in many of the areas which are target areas for improvement, whether it be at regional airports where we're trying to improve connectivity and you know, put battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell stations into small regional airports. It's going to help facilitate the levelling up agenda. Our academic network, whether it be further education institutes or higher education institutes, are spread right throughout the UK. So we're in a sector that actually plays almost perfectly to the levelling up agenda, and we need to you know, really reinforce that message all the time.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another couple of angles on the collaboration thing. I think most of the points have been covered. It kind of comes naturally to us. But I think, particularly sitting here next to my Airbus colleague, I think we have an obligation as the primes, if you like, to collaborate. And I think part of the funding we get from the government is with an expectation that we will pull through SMEs and smaller groups and academia. You know, we work closely with the universities on that. So I think there's an obligation as well as a benefit from collaboration. And the other one I will add is global collaboration. We talked about it previously. So, you know, the climate emergency is too big a subject not to collaborate around the world. So we've got to bring the brightest and the best. And whatever happens in terms of the outcome of our ability to associate to Horizon Europe or whatever, we will collaborate in Europe. We will find a way because we need to. So I think, you know, we naturally collaborate, and we've got to, because we can't afford to get caught up with other things that aren't important to decarbonising the world of aerospace.
So I think just building on that, Alan, collaboration is incredibly important, but the other thing I think that's going to be important is innovation. And I don't necessarily mean wacky new ideas, but you know, that kind of gradual innovation that's going to improve what we're doing and how we do it, and also how we operate and how we work with each other. for an industry that's been for a very long time quite traditional and with very long lead times and a bit stovepiped, if I dare say that, I think that requires quite a change in culture. Is that something that you see starting to come through, or do you think that's something that we actually need to be working a lot more on?
I'll start on that one since I've got the mic. I think it's happening. And I think the other thing is, and it's partly been facilitated by the fact that a lot of the technologies which will deliver the net zero solution aren't the traditional ones that have been working on. So we've not got, yes, there's some big ugly players like me and Airbus and others, but actually, I'll give you an example, Electroflight, where we set the world record for electric-powered aviation. We worked with a small startup called Electroflight. We worked with Yasa Motors, and those weren't companies we'd ever collaborated with before. And we did it with a really, small budget and a small group of people, and that was a fantastic way. And to be honest, we learned tons about the integration of battery systems and electric propulsion, but we also learned how well to move quickly and to collaborate more as well. And I think that's going to be a key going forward. And if I'm looking at, be it fuel cells or handling cryogenic hydrogen, that's not the same as a guy that designs a single crystal turbine blade. I've got to go outside and get that. So I think we've got an opportunity and indeed a necessity by these new technologies to go out and find this. The downside, which we may come on to, is that in many cases you're actually competing for the same skills. So I think the skills agenda will be a challenge of that. And that's why we need a clear, a clear sustainable agenda that people want to be part of as well. So there's, it's incumbent upon us, I think, to make sure we set that compelling vision that people want to be part of.
I was just going to compliment really with why we've introduced the ZEDC network in Airbus, so the Zero Emission Development Centres. So we have one in the UK, we have one in Spain, Germany and France, and we're leveraging the skills and competencies in each of those countries to try and learn much more quickly and fail maybe more quickly. So, we don't invest pre-program normally in this way, with test facilities, and we don't have to have a big shiny new building that is perfect at this point, but we have to start to use these facilities to learn, test. And at the moment, the priority is about safe handling of hydrogen, as well as it is to understand the limitations on the equipment that exists. So, turning a big ship like Airbus is a challenge, but the ZEDC network is actually really helping do that, because we will, as I say, we'll bring new people into the organisation, which is what we're doing, which is great. We're bringing new academia, but we're also actually, putting small-scale test facilities that validate models and validate new analytical methods that will help de-risk the feasibility of this product and these technologies, but also enhance the safety criteria around it. So it is happening. It's quite a change from 1997 when I joined, for sure. And I guess we just got to keep going, because this is a long journey. This is a really long journey.
And I was just going to add, I do think, when you see throughout history, when you see kind of innovations come out, there often has been an urgency or an emergency. So, even recently, if you look at the COVID vaccine, that was an emergency. And I think, and in wartime, innovations and new things that have come out when there's been a war, because there's been an urgent need to action. And so I think that realisation of that almost climate emergency is creating that more innovation at the moment. And I just think that the only difference is that it's easy for people to think it's long in the, far away in the distance, whereas with COVID it was very real and now, and it's creating that, I suppose, urgency and emergency to enable that innovation to continue.
Sorry, I just realised that I can't actually see any of you, which is why I moved to the front so that I could actually get face to face rather than staring at the side of your head. Before we get to kind of questions from the audience, I've got one more. So Roger, I think, is somewhere in the audience. There we go. Roger has a question for the panel.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So Roger Gardner, UK Aerospace Research Consortium. Iain's done a great job in sort of setting out that collaboration is very much the DNA of this grouping of universities, and it's an expanding community. Net zero very much underpins what we are about, and all of our theme activities are very much geared towards helping to draw up technologies and innovations from the low level towards commercialization. I'd be really interested to know the panel's views in terms of what sort of research topics do you think that UK ARC and wider universities should be prioritizing in order to help support the sector's move towards net zero?
The microphone moved fairly quick. I think we've laid out in broad terms. We've laid out the big headings. It's the hydrogens, it's the cryogenics, and stuff like that. But I think also, and we're already starting to do that. And interestingly enough, that may be with universities that we've not traditionally collaborated with. For example, we've got a University Technology Centre network which goes back probably 30 years, which was founded on, I'll call it, evolution of gas turbines. There may be different skills in different universities. So I think we need to be clear that we need to be diverse in the way we look at universities on that one. But I think the other thing as well, looking at the wider sector, is things like, for example, direct air capture. You know, that's not traditional aerospace one, but we sure as hell know it's going to be part of the solution. So we need, and to some extent, I think we need you to tell us as well, quite frankly. Yeah, we've got ideas, and you've heard a lot of those, but it's a broad agenda, and I think where you've got ideas, we'd welcome them come forward as well. And I think we're going to need that collaboration with the network to help come forward with those ideas. You know, they've been very much part of evolving some of those philosophies. I mentioned Cambridge, you know, Cranfield's doing so. There's loads of people doing that, but we need your thoughts on that as well.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think as well, net zero is pervasive. It streams through everything that we do, and that has the opportunity as well to dissolve, I guess, some of the impact that you could make. So the real importance of the UK Strategic Aerospace Research Forum is to have really focused areas where there is maybe gaps in our knowledge, in our capability, and in our infrastructure. So if we look at hydrogen as a perfect example, the Royce Institute study of capability to be able to test hydrogen and to turn it into a technology that is applicable to the sector, we need to have a unified view of how the UK is going to participate in that test infrastructure, and how the universities play a massive part in that, how the catapults play a massive part in that, and how the other RTO networks, the TWIs, the MPLs of this world, all play an active part in delivering that journey. And I think to have that focus and that priority, and to be able to provide that insight, coming back to Sophie's point, is being able to educate the sector, educate the wider community in terms of the needs that we need, to make that significant difference. Yeah. I think coming back to the previous question, actually, aerospace is changing so much as well. We're seeing emerging platforms, the UAM network, and the number of platforms and the sub-regional and the regional markets are driving. They're driving their own agenda in terms of what they want to achieve, which is accelerating the traditional aerospace companies as well, to do more and to have more change as well, because it opens new opportunities as well. So, yeah, it's all about ecosystem.
I shouldn't really answer the question that's being set from UK Art, but it's a great question, and I think if I look at one of the questions that does get asked is, from a university perspective, the relationship with ATI. The ATI programme is, as I see it, fundamentally an industry-led programme of which academia provides support. UK ARC is supporting that, but there is, and Alan alluded to it, it's the university-led side of things, industry engaged, where we're focusing on, and in some respects I can think of the Donald Rumsfeld quote, there's the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, and I think academia can very much be exploring some of those unknown unknowns. When I think of things like non-CO2 emissions, when I think of some of these more difficult questions, actually there's a really strong role for academia to play in those unknown unknowns, and so it's difficult to put them in themes, but I think that's a slightly different angle on the the structured approach. What are the unknown questions, and how can we help resolve answers to them?
Yeah. And I think if I just plug the ATI Fly Zero project for a second, they did a really good academic report where they worked with a number of people on what exists already and where the gaps are. And there are huge gaps there, and that's not necessarily to say we can fund the research in those gaps, but it's just to highlight to the industry, here's what we know, here's what we probably need to know, and actually there's a whole area over here where we don't know very much at all. And I think those kinds of pieces of work, those kinds of reports are really helpful as well in getting us thinking about, well, what do we need to know? Because at the moment there is so much risk and variability in some of the assumptions that are being made in the net zero kind of approach and targets, that actually we need to be able to narrow those down and really understand kind of what sits behind some of that. Let me see, is there anybody in the audience who has a burning question? There we go. Let me get you the mic, sir.
Thank you. So I've got two questions. First question is SAF. Can that technically be made net zero on a large scale? And if not, what are the obstacles? And secondly, with SAF, you're taking carbon at ground level and you're dumping it high up. Does that matter from a global warming standpoint?
Okay, I'll start with that one, and others I'm sure will have knowledge as well. So the answer is it depends, because if you look at, it depends on your feedstock, quite frankly, and what you've got to go through to process it to get it into an aviation fuel. So on average, the kind of bio-derived fuel source is around about 80%, some more, some less, and I'm sure colleagues on the panel will know more than me. But if you get something like a power-to-liquid source where you electrolyse water into the you electrolyze hydrogen and then use that with captured CO2, then that's pretty damn close to net zero, providing your electricity, of course, that you're using for your electrolyzer is green. Hence, the comments earlier about that, really. So I think that's where you get to on that one. It can be, but I think, and that's why you've got to look very carefully. And there is some guidance provided, by, is it ICAO on that? You might know. On ICAO on the various. Carbon reduction for the various feedstocks as well, but I think power to liquid is the source. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Does it matter if you're taking CO2 at ground level and putting it high up?
That's a really often asked question. Our belief is that it doesn't. We've worked with the atmospheric scientists. Because of the residency time of CO2, it's around for a long time. Eventually, the world mixes it up for you, so it doesn't really matter in that aspect. You can take it out and you can still get credit for it. So in theory, hydrogen and SAF have the same net zero footprint, if you like. You're creating no new CO2. Arguably with one you are recycling your CO2, whereas the other one you're not producing it. But it's an interesting argument, but the science I think supports the fact that because the residency time, it makes no difference whether you deposit it at altitude and draw it out at sea level. Matt, did you want to add anything?
No, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, we've got one at the front, Emily.
Hi, Iain Risk from the Centre for Modelling and Simulation. I'm really interested in the discussion that we've been having about the development of all these potential solutions and the impact that will have on the infrastructure that you'll need at the airports, and whether or not the question of potentially 4 energy sources is actually viable for airport operations. So if you've got hydrogen, electric, SAF, and traditional fuel, is that workable in the current airport infrastructure?
Really good question. I think the short answer is it's going to have to be, because I think we will have SAF and hydrogen is our planning assumption. I'd make your 4-3 because the beauty of SAF is it's drop-in. It can be blended at up to 50%, will be 100%. So you don't need new infrastructure at the airport. You don't need new pipelines. You do need SAF plants. And as Claire's outlined, you do need to make sure your engines and your aircraft systems can run on 100%. But that we think is more solvable. Hydrogen is a good question because, and by the way, we see hydrogen as being the key fuel for short haul, certainly for an airport like Heathrow, more than battery electric. But by the way, that will still have electricity needs to convert gas into liquid at the airport, for example, leaving aside how you're going to generate that quantity of hydrogen at a UK level, but just at the airport. Our planning assumption on that is, and we had some funding from Innovate UK to look at this, is that until the mid to late 30s, lorry delivery of gaseous hydrogen, liquefied and then distributed on site, will work for us without huge infrastructure investment, some liquefaction capacity. But then you'll reach a point where there are too many lorries, crudely, so you'll need a pipeline to bring gaseous hydrogen, almost certainly, to the airport. And actually you'll need some kind of hydrant system at the airport for hydrogen. Clearly, retrofitting something like that is a big task. If we are expanding, it becomes easier to build that into the design. But our goal here is we are unlikely to be directly in that hydrogen value chain. So our goal is enable and don't block is our guiding principle. Make sure that we're far enough ahead in anticipating that we are enabling the uptake of hydrogen. One final point on electricity. and this isn't just about aircraft, as we look at our net zero plan, it's effectively a plan to electrify. So that's everything from some hybridization of aircraft and plugging in, certainly liquefaction of hydrogen, more EV charging for vehicles, switching off gas and switching to electric heating. Everything is saying we're going to need more electricity at Heathrow. So there's a related question for us on how do we make sure we are generating as much of that on or near site as we can, that we've got the networks to distribute it. That's a big question for us too.
Yeah.
And one other comment, I suppose, is with the ZEDCs, we're taking the opportunity to work, or particularly with the UK ZEDC, which has to handle kerosene, SAF and hydrogen today. So we're working really closely with the HSE to understand the limits of which energy type and which volumes you can have at any one time. Because obviously, from a plant point of view, a ZEDC point of view, we'll take all of the learning that is, in theory, hopefully scalable to then enhance the sort of safety criteria at future airports. It's exactly the objective of the hydrogen hub airports that you've seen announced all over Europe. And hopefully later this year, you'll see further announcements in terms of Asia and North America. And one of the objectives is to understand that safe handling of multi-fuels.
And it'd be remiss of me if you like reading reports. My company, Connected Places Catapult, did do a report on this, funded by working with the Department for Transport, called the Zero Emission Flight Infrastructure Project, and we're looking at doing a phase 2 on that now, exactly to address these challenges.
And it would be remiss of me, not to mention Cranfield, be remiss of me not to plug your own organisation, Iain, CFMS, who did an excellent report looking at the Scottish aviation scene and what the potential was there. Because some of those regional Scottish airports, the island ones, are going to be very different to what Matt described from a Heathrow perspective. So they might have answered it in a slightly different way.
Okay, and we're coming to the end of the panel, but we've got a couple of questions on Slido that I think we can probably hit really quickly. So the first one is, what little-known UK startups do the panellists see as future household names in sustainable aviation? Go on, plug some people. Let's buy some shares.
I feel widely exposed. Well, one of the suppliers we're working with that's a small UK company is a company called Oxensis. That is a... I didn't even see you there, Iain. But it's a real example of taking that smaller relationship and making really good success, which we are doing together on the Zero E programme. And I know when I spoke at Farnborough last year, I was approached by many more smaller companies that we are connecting with, and I'm pleased to say we've connected with various other companies this week during the Farnborough Airshow. I think the important thing, some of these announcements that are happening this week will give the smaller companies some, let's say, longevity, lower risk of investing and working with Airbus and Rolls-Royce and the other companies here, that there's that long-term funding available to be able to take that development, collaboration, joint partnership. But yes, I've plugged Oxensis without realising you were there, Iain. But yeah, my team, Chris and everyone will be very pleased. But it's a really good example of just making that progress on new technology that will see its way, almost certainly, onto the Zero E.
Iain.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of starters for 10. In terms of hydrogen, I'm sure there's a number of hydrogen companies, small hydrogen companies, ITM Power, Intelligent Energy. I don't know which, but one of them's going to become big. We've got alternative platforms, and just in Farnborough this time round, Vertical Aerospace, and you see their eVTOL product. Vertical could well become a worldwide, a global name from a very small startup business. So it isn't just those small startups that are going to play their part in the current OEM supply chain structure. There are companies that are going to be creating new markets and new opportunities. But those would be my 2 starters for 10.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for me that we've been working very closely with Vertical and others, SPL, EAG, to try and look at the art of the possible and where those products might end up. We've also been working with recycling companies like Signet Texkimp, where we used some of their capability to take a carbon fiber, long fiber storage tank, like a hydrogen tank, to depolymerize the material take that material off and then recycle that material and repurpose that to build another tank, so that we could show the art of the possible. So I think it runs from everything from the big products and platform development and verticals as well, all the way through the supply chain, and there's loads of opportunities across that.
Yeah, and I think I'd echo that. I mean, we work with a number of very good companies with some great ideas who are working their way into the supply chains, and I think it's a really positive future. We're going to have to stop because the staff are trying to get in to clear the room. So I just want to say a big thank you to my panellists. I really appreciate your time, particularly in this hot room. There is water at the back. If anybody wants to grab some, please do. And thank you very much for taking part. This will be on our YouTube channel. I have a few more questions that I will put to the panel separately, and I will post their answers for you on LinkedIn. But thank you very much.